The year was 1238. In the heart of Central Asia, beneath the vast blue sky that the Mongols called eternal heaven, a punishment was being prepared, one that would blur the line between life and death, between punishment and transformation. A woman, stripped of her armor but not her pride, was lowered into a vat filled with oak bark extract and lime. For 23 days, she would remain conscious, her body slowly hardening into leather, while her mind stayed horrifyingly aware. But here's what freezes the blood more than the process itself. She wasn't a common prisoner. She was the granddaughter of Genghis Khan, one of the most decorated generals of the Mongol Empire. And as her flesh transformed into something unrecognizable, she sang. Not screams, not pleas for mercy, songs of war, anthems of conquest, until her voice disappeared into silence. By the end of this story, you'll uncover 3 truths that historians have quietly avoided for over 7 centuries. First, how the Mongols used primitive chemistry to turn living human flesh into tanned leather. Second, who this mysterious general truly was, and why her own family ordered her transformation. And third, why to the Mongols this unspeakable ritual wasn't cruelty at all, but mercy. To understand why this happened, we have to step into the world of the Mongols at their peak, an empire so vast, so disciplined, that it reshaped the planet's history. By the mid-1200s, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to Hungary, from the frozen forests of Siberia to the deserts of Iraq. Over 100 million people lived under their dominion. And here's something most textbooks never dared to mention. Nearly 1 in 5 Mongol military officers were women, not healers, not camp followers, commanders, women who led cavalry charges, executed prisoners, and governed territories the size of France. They were the steel backbone of Mongol warfare. From the moment they could walk, girls of noble blood were trained to ride, to shoot, to kill. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din once wrote, "Mongol women fight with no hesitation of mercy." But in a society built on conquest, victory was everything. And defeat, especially for a general of noble birth, wasn't just failure. It was shame deeper than death itself. Men who failed on the battlefield were granted an honorable end, a swift execution, a clean death. But women of noble blood, they faced something worse, a punishment so gruesome it became legend. The Mongols called it holek, literally skin-changing. This wasn't myth. It's documented in 3 independent chronicles. The Tarikh-i-Jahanushi, written by Persian historian Atamalik Juvaini in 1260, The Secret History of the Mongols, hidden in untranslated passages for centuries, and an Armenian monastic record titled The History of the Nation of Archers. Each described the same horrific ritual with chilling precision, and it wasn't done in the shadows. It was ceremonial, spiritual, sanctioned by the heavens themselves. Because for the Mongols, holek wasn't just a punishment. It was a transformation of the soul. So let's take a deep breath and step into the process that turned living human beings into something else entirely. To understand the horror, you have to understand the science. Even without modern technology, the Mongols mastered a process that today we'd call biochemical torture. A ritual so slow, so deliberate, that it blurred the line between execution and preservation. Human skin has 3 main layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the subcutaneous tissue beneath. In traditional leather making, the goal is to strip away fats and proteins while keeping collagen intact. Modern tanneries do this with industrial acids and chromium salts, but the Mongols discovered a way to do it, on a living human being. Stage 1. The lime bath. 72 hours of burning silence. The condemned was submerged up to the neck in a vat of quicklime, calcium oxide dissolved in warm water. At that temperature, it wouldn't kill instantly. Instead, it would dissolve the outer layer of skin, exposing raw nerve endings across the entire body. Imagine the sensation, a constant chemical fire too weak to end life, but strong enough to erase every inch of protective flesh. For 3 days, the victim would remain awake, aware, and screaming. Yet she couldn't die, because her caretakers, the Mongol shamans, wouldn't allow it. Stage 2. The tannin bath. 18 to 21 days of living preservation. Once the outer skin was stripped away, the victim was transferred into a second vat, this one filled with oak bark extract, rich in tannin acid, mixed with animal fats. This was the same formula used to tan hides into leather. But on a living body, tannin does something far more sinister. It bonds directly with collagen fibers, slowly mummifying the flesh while blood still circulates. Over days, the skin would harden and darken, from pink to grey to a glossy brown. The body itself became the vessel of its own preservation. The chronicles describe it vividly. Her arms turned as the bark of trees, her eyes unblinking, her flesh no longer flesh. Stage 3. The preservation paradox. Here's where nightmare turned into science. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the shamans, called udagan, were not executioners. They were spiritual scientists, female mystics believed to channel the will of the eternal sky. They had learned how to keep the victim alive long enough for the ritual to complete. They used herbs and liver paste to prevent organ failure and internal bleeding. Modern forensics would later confirm these mixtures contained compounds rich in vitamin K, which promotes blood clotting. In other words, they weren't killing the victim. They were deliberately keeping her alive. Why? Because consciousness was sacred. If the spirit left the body before the skin fully hardened, the transformation would fail. To the Mongols, this wasn't cruelty. It was devotion. The woman's suffering ensured that her soul would remain bound to her body, turning her into what the Mongols called an eternal guardian. A failed general didn't simply die. She was reborn, her flesh transformed into armor, her spirit condemned to protect the very army she had failed to defend. The secret history describes it poetically. She will sing the songs of victory as her flesh becomes armor. She will not die. She will be reborn as living protection. And yes, she was expected to sing. Throughout the process, the udagan would chant battle hymns, and the victim, if still conscious, was expected to join them. The songs were both ritual and proof of endurance. When the singing stopped, the transformation was nearly done. Armenian monks who witnessed these ceremonies wrote that the Mongols preserved their dead as idols of leather, whose eyes still held the glimmer of thought. For centuries, historians dismissed those accounts as religious exaggeration, until 1961, when Soviet archaeologists unearthed something that changed everything. Beneath the ruins of Karakorum, the ancient Mongol capital, they discovered a sealed ceremonial chamber. Inside were bronze restraints, 2 massive vats lined with residue of oak tannin, and carved stone tablets detailing a ritual nearly identical to the one described in the medieval chronicles. The most disturbing find? Fragments of chemically tanned human skin, preserved, leathery, and ancient. The discovery was immediately classified by the Soviet government. For 40 years, the world wouldn't know. But when those reports were finally declassified in 2003, they confirmed what no one had wanted to believe. The ritual wasn't myth, it was real. And at the heart of it all stood one woman whose story still haunts the Mongolian plains. Her name was Alaki, granddaughter of Genghis Khan, and the only female commander ever to be subjected to Holek. In the summer of 1238, she led 10,000 Mongol cavalry into the mountains of Georgia, but the terrain betrayed her. A single miscalculation, splitting her forces in hostile ground, led to one of the most devastating ambushes in Mongol history. 7,000 of her warriors were slaughtered. Alaki survived, and when she returned to camp, she didn't flee, didn't beg, didn't hide. She waited for judgment. The cruelty, the Grand Mongol War Council, convened. Their verdict was unanimous. She would not be executed. She would be transformed, according to the Armenian monks who witnessed her final days. She did not cry. She did not plead. When her sentence was given, she removed her own armor and walked to the vat herself. For 19 days, her voice echoed across the valley, not in screams, but in song. Imagine that for a moment. A woman stripped, burned, dissolved, transformed. And she sang. 19 days later, her voice vanished. 4 days after that, the transformation was complete. When her body was lifted from the vat, her skin had hardened into a gleaming brown shell. Her form was mounted on a frame and carried before the Mongol armies as a standard of warning and faith. The chronicles say soldiers knelt when they saw her, the eternal guardian, the woman who had failed and yet would march with them forever. But the story doesn't end here, because when Soviet scientists finally tested those remains centuries later, they uncovered something so advanced, so horrifying, it forced historians to rewrite what they thought was possible in the 13th century. What they found in those leathered remains would prove that the Mongols' understanding of the human body went far beyond torture. It bordered on medical engineering. When Soviet archaeologists opened the chamber beneath Karakorum in 1961, they thought they were uncovering a simple burial vault, maybe ceremonial tools, relics of the empire's glory. What they found instead was a secret that would stay locked away for 42 years. Bronze restraints, 2 vast ceramic vats lined with residue that tested positive for oak tannin and quicklime, stone tablets covered in ancient Mongolian script detailing a ritual of flesh transformation, and, most disturbingly, what appeared to be human skin hardened and preserved, not by time but by chemistry. The Soviets immediately classified everything. The lead archaeologist's report was marked top secret. When the international academic community asked what had been found, officials simply said, ceremonial objects of no scientific importance. It wasn't until 2003, when the files were finally declassified, that the world learned the truth. Hidden in the archives of the Russian Academy of Sciences was a forensic report so unsettling that even professional historians hesitated to cite it publicly. Let's look at what those scientists actually found. The forensic team analyzed microscopic samples from the leathered remains and ran chemical breakdowns. They expected to find traces of simple medieval tanning, animal fat, organic acid, maybe ash. What they found instead didn't fit any medieval formula. The report stated, sample analysis reveals epidermal degradation consistent with extended lime exposure prior to death. Dermal collagen shows tannin cross-linking at depths, suggesting gradual penetration over 18 to 26 days. That part confirmed what the chronicles described, but then came the bombshell. Subcutaneous tissue samples reveal the presence of vitamin K analogues, compounds that promote blood clotting and prevent internal hemorrhage. Wait, vitamin K in 1238? That vitamin wasn't even identified by modern science until the 20th century. But the Mongols had somehow figured out, empirically, instinctively, that feeding certain herbs and liver mixtures could keep someone alive longer by stopping internal bleeding. In other words, they were performing a primitive form of biochemical life support. Let's break that down. When the lime began dissolving outer tissue, the victim's capillaries would rupture. Normally, blood loss and infection would kill within hours, but the Mongols' shamans, the Udagan, fed their victims a paste made from raw liver and herbal mixtures now known to contain high levels of vitamin K and tannins. Those compounds caused blood to clot more efficiently, sealing wounds and slowing bleeding. At the same time, they provided water to prevent dehydration and herbal stimulants to keep the heart beating. The report's conclusion read, based on tissue integrity, collagen cross-link depth, and clotting compound concentration, the subject remained biologically viable for approximately 23 to 26 days. Nerve death would have progressed from extremities inward, suggesting preserved central nervous function and prolonged consciousness. Let that sink in. She stayed conscious, aware, for nearly a month, while her body was being chemically transformed. This wasn't just torture. It was intentional preservation of awareness, and the more you think about that, the more it makes sense in the Mongol worldview. To them, pain wasn't punishment, it was purification. The longer the suffering, the stronger the spirit. The longer she endured, the more powerful her afterlife presence would become. The Udagan saw themselves as midwives of transformation, not murderers. Every minute she remained alive meant the ritual was working. Every scream was a prayer, every breath was a chant, and when the transformation was complete, her preserved form wasn't buried, it was carried into battle. Both the secret history of the Mongols and Juvayni's chronicle described these preserved bodies being mounted on tall wooden poles and brought before the army during sieges. They were displayed like divine relics, reminders of devotion, strength, and terror. Because the message they sent was clear: if this is what we do to our own when they fail, imagine what awaits you. Armenian chroniclers recorded that Georgian soldiers who saw these leather women fled in panic before the Mongol charge even began. The psychological effect was devastating. These preserved forms weren't just trophies, they were weapons. Weapons of fear, weapons of faith, weapons of control. And yet, behind this cruelty lay an uncomfortable truth. The Mongols considered this merciful. To them, a dishonored soul wasn't to be erased. It was to be bound, made eternal, given purpose beyond death. The leather shell became a vessel, an anchor for the spirit, ensuring it stayed with the army it once commanded. It was immortality through agony. But even the Mongols, masters of terror, eventually realized that some weapons cut too deep, even into their own hearts. The ritual of holek, or skin changing,